I do want you. I'm going to throw this theory out. We didn't talk about this, so you're not prepared. But I've been really thinking about the U.S. status of the reserve currency, and that's going to tie into oil and gas here in a second. And I really think, from a just putting off whatever side, this isn't a pro-America, anti-America, pro anything. This is just strictly a what is happening in the world. And the push for a challenge to the reserve currency is coming from China. We saw a 25-year deal struck with Iran over the weekend. It's coming from Bitcoin. We've seen that Bitcoin's getting play, and then you also see that like India is talking about banning Bitcoin, and we can debate whether that's possible or not. That's a separate issue. There is a threat to the reserve currency, and that would impact oil and gas. It would seem that we have companies who right now are looking at Bitcoin as an alternative for flare mitigation. We talked about as a way to raise revenue, but maybe just 30 seconds, 45 seconds. I'm kidding. The next few minutes, maybe unpack the importance, or is it important that the U.S. dollar stays a reserve currency for oil prices, or how might that be impacted as we see these things unroll? Because if China and Iran are doing a 25-year deal, they're going to figure out a way around the dollar, unless the U.S. is going to lift the sanctions on Iran.
The issue you raised, basically, and the discussion has been going on for 40 years. So it's been going on for a long time, and many predictions basically failed. But we have certain issues we have to focus on when we have this discussion, and we have to agree on from the beginning. First of all, we have to distinguish between oil pricing in dollar and getting revenues in non-dollar. This is a very important discussion or distinction. Getting revenues in dollars could happen in any time, at any time, even 20 years ago or 20 years from now. This is not a big deal. A country can just convert the currency or tell the buyer, I need the money in this, and the buyer can convert it. But the pricing of oil itself has been in dollar and is still in dollar and will stay in dollar. As I mentioned on Twitter, basically the only time where oil will be stopped from being priced in dollar if the U.S. as a nation collapses. Aside from that, there is no reason to price the oil in any other currency. But in terms of revenues, and I think back to your point, and that's what you meant, is what if those countries start converting their own foreign reserves to non-dollar? What if they start converting every revenue they get to non-dollar? Well, there is something possible and something not possible. What is unique about the US dollar is two things. First of all, it has worldwide acceptance, even from those who never went to school in their life. Strangely enough, if you are dealing with a mafia or criminals, and you put on the table all types of money, including Bitcoin and gold and diamond, and you want to pay them and tell them choose, number one, they will choose the US dollar. They will choose others as second choice because of certain limitations. But even the mafia until today, they prefer dollars. Even when you talk to the Russians or the Iranians, they still prefer the dollar. So it has worldwide acceptance. And the second point is we have liquidity. There is no other currency in the world that has that liquidity. And virtual currencies, etc., they don't have that liquidity. So oil trade is the largest trade in the world, and we need enough liquidity to cover it. And the only currency that can do that is the US dollar. Probably you heard the discussions we had with some of your friends on the Bitcoin side in the last couple of weeks. There is no way, given what we see right now, that oil will be priced in Bitcoin.
Agreed. Yes.
But if a country wants to get the revenues in Bitcoin, they might ask for it. But there is a big issue here, and people should understand. OPEC has a chance to change the pricing of oil in 1973, 1974. And they did some secret studies and some public studies. And they concluded that the dollar is the best. And one of the reasons why, because yes, the dollar value or the real value declined after we disconnected the dollar from gold. But in terms of volatility, still have very low volatility relative to other currencies. And if you are a producer or you are a consumer, you don't want to price your product in a very volatile currency. And to talk about Bitcoin, you don't want to make it to price it in Bitcoin when you go from 5,000 to 65,000 in a very short period of time.
Yeah, I think the Bitcoin thing is interesting. I always say my confidence of Bitcoin is a 6 to an 8, somewhere between there. I don't think it's going to get snuffed out completely, but I do think it's a far more. I do think it's more plausible than maybe the biggest Bitcoin bulls think. But I think right now for producers, if the Bitcoin mining is something of interest, that's a way to potentially increase the revenue. But I don't, well, I remember back when Trump pulled out of the Iran deal, and they're talking about what's going to happen, and all the sanctions with the dollar and how they can put pressure on the currency. I remember pointing out, well, why don't they just go to Bitcoin? And I was kind of being tongue in cheek, and the reason is they don't want to go to Bitcoin because no country wants to go to a cryptocurrency because they realize they lose the power over their citizens once they institute something decentralized like Bitcoin. So I don't think Bitcoin will get any kind of global or countrywide adaptation because what sense would it make for a government to do such a thing? So I think you're kind of limited there on where to go. But I am curious, like the digital yuan, if you will see, Iran becoming consider working something with China on the digital yuan, and so they can try to circumvent the U.S. sanctions that way.
It's already happened, and it's been happening. So there is no. It's happening with Russia. It's happening with Turkey. So this been going on, and it happened, but they already realized that there are problems, and we've seen it before our eyes when Turkey and Iran decided to exchange to do the trades in local currencies. Okay, all of a sudden the Iranian rial just collapsed, and no one on the other side will accept it. And all of a sudden they went back and give me dollar, and then they said, okay, give me gold. And then almost a year later, the Turkish currency collapsed, and the Iranian part, now they don't want it anymore.
Well, one of my favorite stories from last year was the story from, I think it's Bloomberg, where Venezuela was loading up planes full of gold and sending them to Iran.
Correct. I mean, that's how they paid, so they can continue the shipments. I mean, the Iranians are notorious for this, that they are willing to help, but if you stop paying, they really, forget about anything else. They stop, and they did it with Venezuela before. They did it with India too, when India held the payments from the previous sanctions. So they are willing really to cut them off, and they cannot afford to be cut off.